Part 1. The Discovery. The desert sun burned hot that October morning in 1882. Joseph Crow Feather wiped sweat from his forehead as he guided his horse along the dusty trail. He was heading back to his small forge after delivering horseshoes to a ranch 20 miles away. The money in his pocket would buy food for the next 2 weeks, maybe 3 if he was careful. Joseph wasn't like most Apache men his age. While others followed traditional ways, he had spent 5 years at the Carlisle Industrial School in Pennsylvania. The government had taken him there as a boy to kill the Indian and save the man, as they put it. He learned to read, write, and work with metal. When he returned to Arizona Territory, he set up a blacksmith shop on the edge of the San Carlos Reservation. Most Apache people didn't trust him completely anymore. They said the white man's school had changed him too much. Most white people didn't trust him either. They saw his dark skin and long black hair and called him just another savage. Joseph lived somewhere in between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. As his horse climbed a small hill, Joseph smelled something wrong. Smoke. But not the good smoke from a campfire or cooking fire. This was thick, bitter smoke that made his nose burn. He urged his horse faster toward the smell. What he found made his stomach turn. A covered wagon sat twisted and broken beside the trail. The canvas top had burned away, leaving only blackened wooden ribs reaching toward the sky, like the bones of some giant animal. Boxes and belongings lay scattered everywhere. Flour spilled across the ground mixed with blood and ashes. Joseph's trained eye read the story quickly. This had been an Apache attack, but something had gone wrong. The raiders had hit the wagon, hard and fast, just like they usually did. But then they had burned everything and left. Real Apache warriors would have taken the horses, the metal goods, anything useful. This waste meant angry young men acting without thinking. Probably the same rogue band that tribal elders had been arguing about for weeks. He climbed down from his horse and walked carefully around the wreckage. 2 bodies lay near the wagon. A man and woman, both white settlers. The man still held an old rifle in his hands. He had tried to fight but never had a chance. Joseph said a quiet prayer for their spirits, even though he knew they probably wouldn't have prayed for his. That's when he heard it. A tiny sound, barely louder than the wind through the desert brush. Joseph froze and listened. There it was again. A quiet whimper, like a hurt animal. He followed the sound to a cluster of rocks about 50 yards from the wagon. Behind the largest boulder, 3 small figures huddled together in whatever shade they could find. Children. White children. The oldest was a boy, maybe 9 years old. His brown hair was dusty and his clothes torn. He held a smaller boy close to his chest. That one looked about 6 with the same brown hair and frightened eyes. Between them sat the smallest child, a little girl who couldn't be more than 4 years old. Her blonde hair hung in tangled curls around a face streaked with tears and dirt. All 3 children stared at Joseph with wide, terrified eyes. They had probably never seen an Apache man up close before. Everything their parents had told them said he was their enemy, someone to fear, someone who might hurt them. The oldest boy tried to speak, but only managed to croak. His lips were cracked from thirst. The little girl had a deep cut on her arm that looked infected. Red lines spread from the wound under her pale skin. Without help, she would be dead in 2 days. Joseph knew he faced a choice that would change his life forever. The smart thing would be to ride away. These weren't his people. These weren't his children. If anyone found out he had been here, they might blame him for the attack. White settlers would want revenge. His own people would say he was getting too involved with white problems. But looking at those 3 frightened faces, Joseph couldn't think about being smart. He could only think about being human. Easy, he said softly in English. Easy now. I won't hurt you. The children pressed closer together. The little girl started crying again, a weak sound that broke Joseph's heart. Your mama and papa? Joseph asked gently. The oldest boy's face crumpled. He didn't need to answer. Joseph could see the truth in his eyes. What are your names? Joseph asked. Billy, The oldest boy whispered. "This is Charlie." He pointed to his younger brother. "And this is Annie." Joseph nodded. "I'm Joseph. I'm going to help you." "Are you going to scalp us?" little Charlie asked, his voice shaking. Joseph felt a stab of sadness. These children had been raised on stories that painted all Apache as monsters. "No, son, I'm going to get you water and food. Then we're going to take care of that cut on your sister's arm." He went back to his horse and brought his water bag. The children drank like they hadn't had water in days, which was probably true. From his saddlebags, Joseph pulled out jerky and hardtack biscuits. He broke the food into small pieces and watched them eat slowly. While they ate, Joseph examined Annie's arm. The infection was bad, but he had treated worse. At the Carlisle school, he had learned basic medicine along with reading and metalwork. He cleaned the wound with water and whiskey from his medical kit. Annie cried but held still while he worked. "You're a brave girl," Joseph told her as he wrapped the clean bandage around her arm. The sun was getting lower. Soon it would be dark, and the desert became dangerous at night. Coyotes, rattlesnakes, and worse things moved in the darkness. Joseph couldn't leave 3 children alone out here, but he also couldn't take them to the authorities. The nearest fort was 40 miles away. By the time they got there, Annie's infection might kill her. The town of Tucson was closer, but Joseph knew what would happen there. They would ask questions about how he found the children. Some people might not believe his story. They might think he was involved in the attack. That left only one choice. Joseph would have to take them home with him. "Listen to me," he said to the 3 children. "Your parents are gone. I'm sorry about that, but you're not alone. I'm going to take you somewhere safe." "Where?" Billy asked. He was trying to be brave, but Joseph could hear the fear in his voice. "To my home, it's not far." "But you're an Indian," Charlie said. Joseph sat back on his heels. "Yes, I am. I'm Apache, but I'm not going to hurt you. Some white people are good, and some are bad. Some Apache people are good, and some are bad. People are just people, no matter what color they are." The children looked at each other. They were scared and alone and had no other choice. Billy finally nodded. "Okay," he said quietly. Joseph gathered what useful things he could find in the wreckage. A few cooking pots, some cloth, a small bag of coins the raiders had missed. He wrapped the children's parents in blankets and said prayers over them. Someday, when it was safe, he would come back and bury them properly. As the sun set, Joseph lifted Annie onto his horse. She was so light, like a bird. Billy and Charlie rode behind him, holding tight. They were all quiet during the ride to Joseph's home. The forge sat in a small valley between 2 hills. Joseph had built it there because the hills blocked the wind and there was a stream nearby for water. His house was simple, just 2 rooms made of adobe bricks. But it was clean and dry and safe. Inside, Joseph lit an oil lamp. The warm light filled the room and chased away some of the fear in the children's eyes. He heated water on his stove and helped them wash their faces and hands. Then he made a simple dinner of beans and cornbread. The children ate slowly, watching Joseph's every move. They were still afraid, but hunger won over fear. After dinner, Joseph made beds for them on the floor using blankets and buffalo robes. Annie fell asleep first, exhausted from pain and fear. Charlie curled up next to her like a protective puppy. Billy stayed awake longer, watching Joseph by the fire. "Why are you helping us?" the boy finally asked. Joseph thought about the question. Why was he helping them? It would have been easier to ride away. Safer, too. "Because you needed help," Joseph said finally. "And because it's the right thing to do, even though we're white, even though you're white." Billy was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Thank you." Joseph nodded. "Try to sleep now. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." But as Joseph sat by the dying fire, watching 3 orphaned children sleep in his home, he already knew what came next would not be easy. He had crossed a line today. He had brought white children into an Apache home. Some people on both sides would never forgive him for that. Still, looking at their peaceful faces in the lamplight, Joseph knew he had made the right choice. These children had lost everything: their parents, their home, their future. The least he could do was give them a chance to live. He thought about his own childhood, taken from his family and sent to a strange school far away. He remembered the loneliness, the fear, the feeling of being caught between two worlds. Maybe that's why he understood these children so well. Maybe that's why he couldn't leave them alone in the desert. Outside, coyotes howled in the distance. The desert night was cold and dangerous. But inside Joseph's small home, 3 orphaned children slept safe and warm. For now, that was enough. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, questions to answer, decisions to make, people to face. But tonight, Joseph Crowfeather had saved 3 lives. And sometimes, saving a life is the only thing that really matters. Part 2. The Makeshift Family. The first weeks were the hardest. Annie's fever raged for 3 days before finally breaking. Joseph sat beside her bed, changing wet cloths on her forehead and forcing water down her throat drop by drop. Billy and Charlie watched from the corner, terrified they might lose their sister too. When Annie finally opened her eyes and asked for water in a clear voice, all 4 of them cried. Even Joseph, who had learned at the Carlisle school that men don't cry, felt tears on his cheeks. "Are you our papa now?" Annie asked one morning while Joseph changed the bandage on her arm. The question hit Joseph like a punch to the chest. He wasn't their father. He would never replace the man who lay buried by that burned wagon. But he was the only parent these children had now. "I'm going to take care of you," he said carefully. "For as long as you need me to." That seemed to be enough for Annie. She smiled and went back to playing with the corn-husk doll Joseph had made for her. Life settled into a routine. Joseph woke before sunrise to start his forge. The children learned to help with simple tasks: pumping the bellows, sorting nails, keeping the water bucket full. Billy was especially good with his hands. He watched everything Joseph did and asked endless questions about metalwork. "Can you teach me to make horseshoes?" Billy asked one day. Joseph looked at the 9-year-old boy. His hands were still small, but they were steady. "It's dangerous work. The metal gets very hot." "I'm not scared," Billy said. Joseph smiled. "No, I don't think you are." "Okay, we'll start with simple things. But you have to promise to do exactly what I say." "I promise." Within a month, Billy could hammer out a simple nail. Within 2 months, he was making small tools. Joseph had never seen a child learn so fast. Charlie was different from his older brother. Where Billy loved working with metal, Charlie loved stories. Joseph had a few books from his school days, and Charlie begged him to read every night. Soon, the boy was reading simple words himself. "Tell us about Apache stories," Charlie asked one evening. Joseph hesitated. Should he tell white children Apache stories? Would that confuse them more? But looking at Charlie's eager face, he couldn't say no. "Okay, but just one. This is the story of Coyote and the fire spirits." As Joseph told the ancient tale, all 3 children listened with wide eyes. They had never heard stories like this before. Stories where animals talked and the world was full of magic. Stories where being clever mattered more than being strong. "Is it true?" Annie asked when he finished. "Stories don't have to be true to teach us something important," Joseph said. "What do you think this story teaches us?" "That being greedy is bad?" Charlie guessed. "That's right. And that sometimes the smallest person can do big things if they're smart and brave." The children nodded seriously. Joseph realized he was not just keeping them alive, he was raising them, teaching them values, helping them understand the world. It was a responsibility that both thrilled and terrified him. Winter came early that year. Joseph worked hard to make sure they had enough food and fuel. He taught the children to help preserve meat, to gather wood, to patch holes in the walls with mud and grass. They worked together like a real family, but they were not a real family, and people were starting to notice. The first visitor was Tom Standing Bear, Joseph's cousin. He rode up to the forge on a cold December morning. and stared at the three white children playing in the yard. "Joseph," Tom said in Apache, "we need to talk." They walked away from the children, but Joseph could feel their worried eyes following him. "What are you doing?" Tom asked quietly. "Taking care of 3 orphans." "White orphans." "Orphans," Joseph repeated firmly. Tom shook his head. "People are talking. They say you've lost your way, that the white man's school made you forget who you are." "I know exactly who I am." "Do you?" "Because Apache men don't raise white children. We have our own children to worry about." Joseph felt anger rising in his chest. These children were dying. Was I supposed to let them die? "Maybe," Tom said bluntly. "Their people kill our children without thinking twice about it. These children never killed anyone. They're just kids, Tom." Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "The tribal council is meeting next week. Your name might come up." After Tom left, Joseph went back to the children. They clustered around him, sensing something was wrong. "Who was that man?" Billy asked. "My cousin." He looked angry. Joseph knelt down so he was eye level with the boy. "Some people don't understand why I'm taking care of you. They think it's wrong." "Because we're white?" Charlie asked. "Because you're white, and I'm Apache, and our people have been fighting for a long time." Annie tugged on Joseph's sleeve. "Are you going to send us away?" Joseph picked her up and hugged her tight. "No, little one, I'm not sending you anywhere. This is your home now." But even as he said the words, Joseph wondered if he could keep that promise. The tribal council meeting was held in the old ceremonial hogan. Joseph sat in the circle with the other men while the elders spoke. For an hour, they discussed hunting, territories, and government rations. Then Chief Grey Wolf cleared his throat. "We have one more matter," the old man said. "Joseph Crowfeather, stand up." Joseph's heart hammered as he rose to his feet. Every eye in the circle was on him. "It has come to our attention that you are raising 3 white children," Grey Wolf said. "Is this true?" "Yes." "Why?" Joseph chose his words carefully. "They were orphaned in a raid. They were dying. I could not let children die when I had the power to save them." An older warrior named Broken Arrow stood up. "These are not our children. They are the children of our enemies. You waste resources on them that should go to Apache families." "I provide for them with my own work," Joseph replied. "I take nothing from the tribe." "You take respect from the tribe," Broken Arrow shot back. "People see you playing father to white children and they lose respect for all of us." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the circle. Joseph felt his face burn with shame and anger. "Have done nothing wrong," he said firmly. Chief Grey Wolf raised his hand for silence. "Joseph Crowfeather, you are a good man, but you walk a dangerous path. These children will never truly be Apache, and by raising them, you distance yourself from your own people." "What would you have me do? Kill them?" "Send them to the authorities. Let white people deal with white problems. They would put the children in an orphanage, or worse." "That is not your concern." Joseph looked around the circle at faces he had known all his life. Some showed sympathy, but most showed disapproval. He realized this was a battle he could not win with words. "I will consider your advice," he said finally, and sat down. After the meeting, Joseph walked home slowly. The children were waiting for him, faces anxious. "What happened?" Billy asked. Joseph sat down heavily by the fire. "The elders want me to send you away." All 3 children moved closer to him, like chicks seeking protection from a hawk. "Are you going to?" Charlie whispered. Joseph looked at their frightened faces. Billy trying to be brave, Charlie clutching his favorite book, Annie sucking her thumb like she did when she was scared. "No," Joseph said firmly. "You belong here now. This is your family." Relief flooded their faces. Annie climbed into Joseph's lap and hugged his neck. But Joseph's problems were just beginning. Over the next few months, fewer Apache people came to his forge. Some who had been friendly before now barely nodded when they saw him. Children who used to play with Billy, Charlie, and Annie were told to stay away. The isolation was hard on all of them, but especially on the children. They started to understand that they were different, that they didn't really belong anywhere. "Why don't the other kids like us?" Charlie asked one day after a group of Apache children had run away when he tried to join their game. Joseph struggled to find the right words. "It's complicated. There has been a lot of fighting between Apache people and white people. Some people think that fighting means we can never be friends. But you're our friend," Annie said. "Yes, I am. And that's what matters." Spring came, and with it new challenges. Joseph's business was suffering because fewer people trusted him. Money was tight. Food was scarce. But somehow they managed. Joseph taught the children everything he could. Billy learned to work the forge like a master craftsman. Charlie could read better than most adults. Annie learned to cook, to sew, to tend the small garden behind their house. More importantly, they learned Apache ways too. They learned to track animals, to read the weather, to move silently through the desert. Joseph taught them words in Apache, songs his grandmother had sung to him. "Are we Apache now?" Charlie asked one night. "You are whatever you choose to be," Joseph replied. "You have Apache skills and Apache knowledge, but you also have white blood and white memories. You are something new." The children seemed satisfied with this answer. They were becoming something unique. White children with Apache hearts, raised by a man who belonged to both worlds and neither. But as 1885 approached, larger forces were gathering that would test their makeshift family in ways none of them could imagine. Far to the south, a warrior named Geronimo was preparing for one last stand against the white settlers. And that final conflict would force Joseph to make an impossible choice. For now, though, they were happy. They were a family built not by blood but by choice, built not by tradition but by love, and that love gave them strength for the dark days ahead. Part 3. The Apache Rejection. The news came like thunder across the reservation in the spring of 1885. Geronimo had broken away from the reservation again. The famous Apache war leader had gathered a small band of warriors and disappeared into the mountains of Mexico. For the third time, he was waging war against the white settlers and the U.S. Army. Joseph heard the news at the trading post and felt his stomach drop. Every Apache knew what this meant. There would be retaliation. Innocent Apache families would suffer for Geronimo's actions. The already tense relationship between the reservation and the outside world would explode into violence. When Joseph got home, the children sensed something was wrong. "What happened?" Billy asked. The boy was 12 now, tall and strong from working at the forge. Joseph sat them down and explained as simply as he could. "A famous Apache warrior named Geronimo has started fighting again. This means there will be trouble for all Apache people." What kind of trouble? 9-year-old Charlie wanted to know. "The army will come, they'll be suspicious of everyone, and people will be angry and scared." Annie, now 7, climbed into Joseph's lap. "Will they hurt us?" Joseph hugged her tight. "I won't let anyone hurt you." But even as he said the words, Joseph wondered if he could keep that promise. The first sign of trouble came 2 days later. A group of Apache warriors rode up to Joseph's forge. Their leader was Robert Broken Arrow, the same man who had spoken against Joseph at the tribal council. "Joseph Crow Feather," Broken Arrow called out. "We need to talk." Joseph stepped outside. The children stayed in the house, but he could see their worried faces at the window. "What do you want, Robert?" "Geronimo's war has started. Every Apache will be watched. Every Apache will be suspected. And here you are, raising white children like pets." Joseph felt his temper flare. "Those children are not pets. They're my family." "Your family?" Broken Arrow laughed harshly. "Look at them, Joseph. Look at their white skin and yellow hair. Do they look like Apache family to you? Family isn't just about what you look like. Tell that to the soldiers who are coming. Tell that to the settlers who want revenge. When they see you with those white children, what do you think they'll believe? Joseph hadn't thought about that. In all the years he'd been raising Billy, Charlie, and Annie, he'd focused on protecting them from Apache disapproval. He hadn't considered how white people would react to seeing an Apache man with white children. "They'll think you kidnapped those children," Broken Arrow continued. "They'll think you're holding them prisoner or worse. Anyone who talks to the children will know that's not true. Will they? Or will they see what they want to see?" Broken Arrow leaned forward in his saddle. "Joseph, I'm trying to help you. Send those children away before it's too late. Before you bring disaster down on all of us." After the warriors left, Joseph sat alone by his forge for a long time. The children came out eventually, drawn by his silence. "What did those men want?" Billy asked. Joseph looked at the three young faces he'd come to love so much. Billy was becoming a man, serious and thoughtful. Charlie remained the dreamer. Always. With a book in his hand, Annie was growing into a bright, cheerful girl who could make anyone smile. "They're worried about what might happen," Joseph said finally. "Because of the fighting. Because of the fighting. And because you're living with me." The children exchanged glances. They were old enough now to understand the complicated world they lived in. "Do you want us to leave?" Charlie asked quietly. Joseph's heart nearly broke. "Never. You're my children now, no matter what anyone says." But the pressure was building from all sides. Over the next few weeks, more Apache families shunned Joseph's family. Children were forbidden to play with Billy, Charlie, and Annie. Adults stopped coming to the forge for work. The breaking point came at the summer gathering. Every year, Apache families from across the reservation came together to celebrate, to trade, and to discuss important matters. Joseph had always brought his small family to these gatherings. The children loved the dancing, the stories, and the sense of community. This year felt different from the moment they arrived. People stared at them openly. Conversation stopped when they walked by. Children pointed at Billy, Charlie, and Annie and whispered to their parents. Joseph set up his camp on the edge of the gathering, away from the main activities. But even there, they couldn't escape the hostile attention. The crisis came on the second night. A group of teenage Apache boys cornered Billy near the stream where he'd gone to fetch water. "Look, it's the white boy who thinks he's Apache," one of them sneered. Billy straightened up. He was as tall as most of them now, and 3 years of forge work had made him strong. "I never said I was Apache." "No, but you act like you belong. Here, you and your white brother and sister. This is our home. Your home is with your own people," another boy said. "Not here, pretending to be something you're not." The situation was getting dangerous. Joseph could see it building toward violence. He started toward the stream, but he wasn't the only one. Moving. Chief Gray Wolf appeared beside the group of boys. His presence immediately calmed the situation. "What's happening here?" the old chief asked. "Just talking, grandfather," one of the boys said respectfully. Gray Wolf's sharp eyes took in the scene. Billy standing alone against a group of hostile Apache boys, Joseph approaching with worry on his face. "Billy," Gray Wolf said, "come with me." Joseph watched nervously as the chief led Billy away from the other boys. They walked to a quiet spot overlooking the gathering. "You're a good boy," Gray Wolf said to Billy. "Joseph has raised you well." "Thank you, sir. But you're not Apache, and you never will be." Billy's face fell. "I know that." "Do you? Do you really?" Gray Wolf turned to face the boy. "Look at this gathering. See the families, the children playing together, the old people telling stories. This is Apache life. This is who we are, and no matter how much you learn our ways, no matter how much you love Joseph, you will always be an outsider here." Billy was quiet for a long moment. "Then where do I belong?" Gray Wolf's expression softened slightly. "That's the question, isn't it? Joseph has put you in an impossible position. You're too Apache for the white world, and too white for the Apache world." When Billy returned to their camp, Joseph could see that something had changed in the boy. He looked older somehow, sadder. "What did the chief say to you?" Joseph asked. Billy shrugged. "Just that I don't belong here." Joseph felt a stab of pain. You belong with me. You belong with our family. Do we? Charlie had overheard the conversation. Sometimes I think we just make things harder for you. Don't ever think that, Joseph said firmly. You three are the best thing that ever happened to me. But the damage was done. The children had finally understood what Joseph had been trying to protect them from, the reality that they lived between two worlds, welcome in neither. The final blow came on the last day of the gathering. Joseph was called before the full tribal council. This time there was no debate. Chief Grey Wolf spoke for everyone. Joseph Crow Feather, you are a good man with a good heart, but your choices are bringing danger to our people. Geronimo's war has made every Apache suspect. We cannot afford to have questions raised about our loyalty. My loyalty has never been in question, hasn't it? You speak English better than Apache. You work with metal like a white man. You raise white children, as your own. Some people wonder where your true allegiance lies. Joseph felt the accusation hit him like a physical blow. I am Apache. I will always be Apache. Then prove it. Send those children away. Show that you put your people first. Joseph looked around the circle of faces. These were men he'd known all his life. Men who had watched him grow up, who had welcomed him back from the white man's school. Now they were asking him to choose between his people and his children. I need time to think, Joseph said. Grey Wolf nodded. You have 1 week. After that, if those children are still with you, you will no longer be welcome on this reservation. The ride home was silent. The children knew something terrible had happened, but they were afraid to ask. Joseph was afraid to tell them. That night, after the children were asleep, Joseph sat by his dying fire and faced the hardest decision of his life. He could send Billy, Charlie, and Annie away and remain with his people. Or he could keep his family together and lose everything else. In the darkness, he heard Annie crying softly in her sleep. Probably another nightmare about the day her parents died. Joseph went to her and smoothed her hair until she settled down. Looking at her peaceful face, Joseph realized he'd already made his choice. He'd made it 3 years ago when he found 3 orphaned children in the desert. He'd made it every day, since then, when he chose love over fear, compassion over tradition. Some choices once made could never be unmade. The next morning, Joseph began packing their belongings. When the children asked where they were going, he told them simply, somewhere. We can be a family. He didn't tell them that by choosing them he was losing the only home he'd ever known. He didn't tell them that he was about to become as much an outsider as they were, but as he watched them help pack their few possessions, chattering excitedly about their new adventure, Joseph knew he'd made the right choice. Family wasn't about blood or tradition or what other people thought. Family was about the people you chose to love and protect. No. Part 4. The White World's Door Slams. Shut the wagon loaded with their few possessions creaked down the dusty road toward Tucson. Joseph drove while the 3 children sat quietly in the back, surrounded by everything they owned. Some clothes, Joseph's blacksmith tools, a few books, and the cornhusk doll he'd made for Annie years ago. It had been a week since the tribal council's ultimatum. A week of painful goodbyes and cold stares. Joseph's own brother, Tom Standing Bear, had come to see them off, but his face showed more disappointment than sadness. You're making a mistake, Joseph, Tom had said. These white children will never truly accept you. And now you're cut off from your own people, too. Joseph hadn't argued. What was the point? Tom might be right, but it was too late to change course now. Papa Joseph, Annie said from the wagon bed. She was 8 now and still called him by the name she'd given him as a frightened 4-year-old. Will we like living with white people? Joseph looked back at her concerned face. I hope so, little one. You are white people, remember? But we're different now, Charlie said. The 11-year-old boy had grown thoughtful over the years, always asking difficult questions. We're not the same as other white children, are we? Billy, now 13 and nearly as tall as Joseph, nodded grimly. We know things they don't know. We've seen things they haven't seen. Joseph sighed. That's true. But maybe that will make you better people. Maybe understanding both worlds will help you build bridges between them. Or maybe it will just make us outcasts everywhere we go, Billy said quietly. Joseph had no answer for that, because he feared the boy might be right. Tucson in 1885 was a growing frontier town. Adobe buildings mixed with newer wooden structures. Cowboys, miners, merchants, and settlers filled the dusty streets. It was loud, busy, and completely different from the quiet life they'd known. Joseph drove straight to the town's business district. If he was going to support his family, he needed work. A blacksmith was always needed in a frontier town. He stopped in front of the largest building with a sign that read, Miller's General Store. "Wait here," he told the children, and climbed. Down from the wagon. The store was full of goods, tools, food, cloth, medicine. Behind the counter stood a thick-set man with graying hair and suspicious eyes. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his tone suggesting he'd rather not. "I'm looking for work," Joseph said. "I'm a blacksmith, a good one." The man looked Joseph up and down, taking in his dark skin, his long hair, his Apache features. "You're Indian?" "Yes." "Apache. We don't need any Indian blacksmiths here." Joseph kept his voice calm. "Have you seen my work?" "Don't need to. Indians can't be trusted. Especially not now, with Geronimo on the warpath again." "I had nothing to do with Geronimo." "That's what they all say." The man turned his back on Joseph. "Find somewhere else to peddle your services." Joseph left the store and tried 3 more businesses. The result was always the same. As soon as people saw he was Apache, they lost interest. Some were politely dismissive. Others were openly hostile. After 2 hours of rejection, Joseph climbed back onto the wagon. The children looked at him hopefully. "Any luck?" Billy asked. "Not yet, but we'll find something." Joseph drove to the edge of town and found a spot to camp for the night. As darkness fell, they built a small fire and ate a simple dinner of beans and hardtack. "The people here don't seem very friendly," Charlie observed. Joseph poked at the fire with a stick. "They're suspicious of strangers, especially Apache strangers." "But we're not strangers," Annie said. "Billy and Charlie and me were white like them." Joseph nodded slowly. "Yes, you are. Maybe tomorrow we should try a different approach." The next morning, Joseph had an idea. Instead of approaching business owners himself, he would let the children do the talking. After all, they were white. They might get a better reception. Joseph sent Billy and Charlie to the main street while he waited with Annie and the wagon. The 2 boys were gone for over an hour. When they returned, their faces were grim. "What happened?" Joseph asked. Billy kicked at a stone in the dirt. "At first, people were nice to us. They asked where we were from, where our parents were. We told them our parents died and you took us in," Charlie continued. "We said you saved our lives. And that's when they stopped being nice," Billy said bitterly. "They started asking all kinds of questions. How long have you had us? What have you done to us? Are we being held against our will?" Joseph's heart sank. This was what Broken Arrow had warned him about. "One woman grabbed my arm and looked me over like she was checking for injuries," Charlie said. "She kept asking if you'd hurt me." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you're the kindest man we know, that you've taken care of us and taught us and loved us." "She didn't believe us," Billy added. "She said Indians steal white children and turn them savage. She said we probably don't even remember what civilized life is like anymore." Joseph closed his eyes. He'd hoped that in a town full of white people, the children would finally find acceptance. Instead, he'd made them objects of suspicion and pity. "There's more," Charlie said quietly. Joseph opened his eyes. "While we were talking to people, a sheriff's deputy was asking questions about us. About you. Someone told him there was an Apache in town traveling with white children." Joseph's blood ran cold. "What did he want to know?" "Everything. Our names, how we met you, whether we want to stay with you or go to an orphanage." "What did you tell him?" "That we want to stay with you," Billy said firmly. "But I don't think he believed us either." That afternoon, the sheriff himself came to their camp. He was a tall, thin man with a badge on his chest and a gun on his hip. His eyes were cold as winter. "You Joseph Crow Feather?" he asked. "Yes. I'm Sheriff Davidson. I understand you're traveling with 3 white children." "These are my children." The sheriff looked skeptical. "Funny thing about that. See, I've been getting reports about an Apache man with white children. People are concerned. They think maybe these children aren't here by choice." Joseph felt the children move closer to him. Annie grabbed his hand. "Talk to them yourself," Joseph said. "Ask them if they want to be here." Sheriff Davidson knelt down to Annie's level. His voice became gentler when he spoke to her. "Hello there, little girl. What's your name?" "Annie." "Annie, this man here, is he keeping you against your will?" Annie looked confused. "I don't understand. Are you staying with him because you want to, or because he's making you?" "Because I want to," Annie said, sounding upset. "He's my Papa Joseph. He takes care of me." The sheriff stood up and looked at Billy and Charlie. "What about you boys?" "Joseph saved our lives," Billy said clearly. "Our parents were killed in a raid. We would have died if he hadn't found us. He's been our father for 3 years. He's taught us to read and write and work with metal," Charlie added. "He's never hurt us or made us do anything bad." "Sheriff." Davidson studied their faces for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. "They seem genuine," he admitted to Joseph. "But that doesn't solve the problem." "What problem?" "The problem of an Apache man traveling with white children in the middle of an Apache war. It makes people nervous. It raises questions." "What kind of questions?" "Questions about where your loyalties lie. Questions about why an Apache would go to such trouble for white children. Questions about whether you might be some kind of spy." Joseph couldn't believe what he was hearing. "A spy? I'm a blacksmith." "Maybe. Or maybe you're something else. Maybe those children are insurance, in case you get caught." "That's ridiculous," Sheriff Davidson shrugged. "Maybe it is, but perception is reality in a place like this. And the perception is that you don't belong here." "Where do we belong then?" Joseph asked desperately. "The Apache don't want us because the children are white. The whites don't want us because I'm Apache. Where are we supposed to go?" "That's not my problem," the sheriff said coldly. "My problem is keeping the peace in this town, and your presence here is disturbing that peace. We haven't done anything wrong. You haven't done anything right either. Look, I'm giving you fair warning. People in this town are getting worked up about you. Some of them are talking about taking matters into their own hands. For everyone's safety, including yours, you need to move on." "And go where?" "Anywhere but here." After the sheriff left, Joseph sat staring at the fire while the children huddled around him. They were all quiet, processing what had just happened. "Are we bad people?" Annie asked in a small voice. Joseph pulled her onto his lap. "No, sweetheart. We're not bad people. We're just different people. And sometimes different scares people who don't understand." "Will we ever find a place where we fit in?" Charlie asked. Joseph looked at the 3 faces that had become his whole world. Billy, trying to be strong and adult. Charlie, still believing that understanding could solve everything. Annie, trusting him to keep her safe no matter what. "I don't know," Joseph said honestly. "But we'll keep trying. And no matter what happens, we'll face it together." That night, as the children slept, Joseph stared up at the stars and wondered what kind of future he could give them. They were caught between 2 worlds, welcome in neither. The Apache rejected them for being white. The whites rejected them for being with an Apache. Maybe Tom Standing Bear had been right. Maybe Joseph had made a terrible mistake in trying to raise these children. Maybe love wasn't. Part 5. The Price of Love. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions from their small homestead. Joseph had built it in a place where no one else wanted to live, 30 miles from the nearest town, far from any reservation, in a valley, where the wind never stopped blowing and water had to be hauled up from a well 40 feet deep. It had been 4 years since they left Tucson. 4 years of wandering from town to town, always meeting the same cold stares, the same suspicion, the same rejection. Finally, Joseph had given up trying to fit into anyone else's world. If no one would accept them, they would create their own world. The house was small but sturdy, built from adobe bricks that Joseph and the children had made themselves. There were 3 rooms, a main room with the fireplace and kitchen, and 2 small bedrooms. Behind the house stood Joseph's forge, rebuilt from memory and necessity. A small corral held their horse and the milk cow they'd traded for 2 years ago. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. And after years of being unwelcome everywhere else, that meant everything. Billy was 17 now, a man in everything but years. The skinny boy who'd hidden behind rocks in terror had grown into someone strong and capable. His hands, scarred from forge work, could shape metal as skillfully as Joseph's. His face, weathered by desert sun and wind, showed a quiet determination that reminded Joseph of his own father. Charlie, 15, remained the family bookworm. He'd read every book they owned at least 5 times and could recite whole passages from memory. But he'd also learned practical skills: how to hunt rabbits and track deer, how to find water in the desert, how to read the weather and cloud formations. He was equally comfortable with Shakespeare and survival. Annie, now 12, had grown into a bright, serious girl who took care of everyone around her. She cooked, mended clothes, tended their small vegetable garden, and somehow always knew when someone needed comfort. She had no memories of her birth parents, knew only Joseph as her father and the boys as her brothers. They were a real family now, bound not by blood, but by shared struggle and unshakable loyalty. But the isolation was taking its toll. Joseph was 41 years old and felt ancient. The years of rejection, of constant moving, of scraping together enough money to survive had aged him beyond his years. His hair was streaked with gray, his face lined with worry. Worst of all, he was beginning to question whether he'd done the right thing. The children were growing up, but growing up into what? Billy was a skilled blacksmith, but who would hire an Apache-raised white man? Charlie could read Latin and discuss philosophy, but what good were those skills in a world that saw him as a curiosity at best? Annie was kind and capable, but what kind of future waited for a girl who belonged to no community? Joseph's fears came to a head one evening in late 1889. A stranger rode up to their homestead just as the sun was setting. Joseph grabbed his rifle and stepped outside, telling the children to stay in the house. The rider was a white man in his 50s, well-dressed and obviously educated. He climbed down from his horse with the careful movements of someone not used to desert travel. "Mr. Crowfeather," the man said. "I'm Daniel Harrison. I'm a reporter for the Phoenix Gazette." Joseph kept the rifle ready. "What do you want?" "I've heard about your unusual family. I'd like to write a story about you." "We don't want any stories written about us?" Harrison held up his hands peacefully. "I understand your caution, but I think your story could help people understand that folks of different backgrounds can live together peacefully." Joseph studied the man's face. He seemed sincere, but Joseph had learned to be suspicious of everyone. "You can water your horse and spend the night," Joseph said finally. "But I make no promises about any story." Over dinner, Harrison talked with the whole family. He was impressed by Billy's skill at metalwork, amazed by Charlie's education, charmed by Annie's gentle nature. He asked respectful questions and listened carefully to their answers. "This is remarkable," Harrison said as the evening wore on. "You've created something unique out here, a truly integrated family." "We've created what we had to create," Joseph replied. "A place where we could survive. But don't you see? This proves it's possible. People of different races living together, learning from each other, caring for each other." Billy looked up from sharpening his knife. "Does it? All it proves is that we were lucky enough to find each other. It doesn't change how the rest of the world treats us." Harrison leaned forward eagerly. "But it could. If people read about your story, if they understand what you've accomplished here." "They'd want to come gawk at us," Charlie interrupted, "like we're animals in a traveling show. Or they'd try to break us up," Annie added quietly. "Send us to different places where we'd fit in better." Harrison looked shocked. "Surely you don't believe that." "We've lived it," Joseph said simply. The reporter left the next morning, promising to think carefully about what he'd learned. Joseph never saw the story that Harrison eventually wrote, but he heard about its effects. Over the next few months, they had more visitors. Most were just curious, wanting to see the Apache man and his white children. A few were officials asking questions about the children's welfare and education. The attention made Joseph nervous. They'd found peace in isolation, but that peace was fragile. Too much notice from the outside world could destroy everything they'd built. His fears proved justified in early 1890. A delegation arrived from the territorial government. 3 men in suits accompanied by a sheriff and 2 deputies. Joseph met them outside, his heart racing. "Joseph Crow Feather," the lead man said. "I'm James Mitchell from the Territorial Department of Children's Welfare. We need to discuss the 3 minors in your care." Joseph's mouth went dry. "What about them?" "Questions have been raised about their living conditions, their education, their future prospects. We're here to evaluate whether this arrangement is in their best interests." The children had come outside despite Joseph's instructions to stay in the house. They stood close together, fear written on their faces. "There's nothing wrong with our living conditions," Billy said boldly. Mitchell looked at the teenage boy with a mixture of pity and condescension. "Son, you may not realize what you're missing. Proper schooling, exposure to civilized society, preparation for adult life in the real world." "This is the real world," Charlie said. "No, son, this is isolation. This is hiding from the real world." Mitchell gestured at the desert around them. "Look at this place. You're cut off from everything. How will you find work? How will you find wives? How will you raise families of your own?" Annie stepped forward, her young voice clear and strong. "Joseph is our family." Mitchell's expression softened when he looked at her. "I'm sure he's been kind to you, dear, but he's not your real father. And living out here with an Indian, cut off from your own people, it's not natural." "Neither is leaving children to die in the desert," Joseph said quietly. "But that's what would have happened if I'd been natural 8 years ago." Mitchell sighed. "Mr. Crow Feather, I'm sure your intentions were good, but good intentions aren't enough. These children need proper education, proper socialization, proper preparation for life in American society." "They can read better than most adults," Joseph replied. "They can survive anywhere. They understand both Apache and American ways. What more preparation do they need? They need to understand their place in the world. The boy needs to learn a proper trade." "I am learning a proper trade," Billy interrupted. "I'm a blacksmith." "You're an amateur learning from someone who was never properly trained himself." Joseph felt the insult like a slap, but he kept his temper. "I trained at Carlisle. I know my trade. And look where it's gotten you. Scratching out a living in the middle of nowhere, raising children who will never truly fit into civilized society." The argument continued for over an hour. In the end, Mitchell delivered an ultimatum. The children could stay with Joseph for now, but they would be monitored. Officials would return regularly to check on their progress. And when Billy turned 18, he would need to demonstrate that he could support himself in the outside world. "If we find that these children are being held back by their current situation," Mitchell said, "we will have no choice but to remove them and place them in more appropriate homes." After the officials left, the family sat in stunned silence. For 8 years they'd been a unit, inseparable and unbreakable. Now the government was telling them that their bond might not be strong enough to survive scrutiny. "They can't really break us up, can they?" Annie asked. Joseph wanted to reassure her, but he couldn't lie. "They have the law on their side. If they decide it's best for you." "It wouldn't be best for us," Charlie said fiercely. "We belong together." "I know that, you know that, but they don't see it that way." Billy stood up and walked to the window. "Maybe they're right about some things," he said quietly. Everyone stared at him. "Maybe we are too isolated. Maybe we do need to think about the future." "Billy," Joseph started. "No, hear me out." Billy turned to face his family. "I love all of you. This is my real family, my only family. But what happens when you get old, Joseph? What happens when Annie wants to get married? What happens when Charlie wants to go to college?" Joseph felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert evening. We'll figure it out,